Hello everyone, this is Mr. P. Yes, and that's a maple leaf. Today we're going to talk about the Indigenous peoples of Canada. Yes, the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis. So let's get started. A brief look at the Indigenous peoples of Canada. That's right, and the maple leaf right there. Okay, my first question. Who were the first people to live in Canada? Were the Europeans or the Indigenous peoples? Well, that's right, the Indigenous peoples. Well, the Indigenous peoples are those whose ancestors were the original inhabitants of Canada, the first people of Canada. And they are divided in three groups. First Nations, that at the same time they are made up of many smaller groups such as the Iroquois, Algonquin, Mi'kmaq, etc. The Inuit and the Métis. So the First Nations. There are over 634 recognized First Nations governments or bands. They live south of the Arctic coast. Each nation has its own culture, customs, beliefs, traditions, and worldviews. Many First Nations believe everything is connected. First Nations have their own creation beliefs. The Inuits. Inuit, Inuktitut for the people, are the indigenous people, the majority of whom inhabit the northern regions of Canada. An Inuit person is known as an Inuk. There are 8 main Inuit ethnic groups. They were hunters and gatherers who moved seasonally from one camp to another. Inuk adults harvest country food, which includes seal, whale, duck, caribou, fish, and berries. So let's take a look at the Métis. This group was formed after the Europeans arrived. The term is used to describe communities of mixed European and Indigenous descent across Canada. The first Métis communities emerged during the Great Lakes fur trade in the 18th century. The blending of European and Indigenous traditions has created a unique and rich Métis culture. Adopting indigenous beading practices and popular European floral designs, the Métis created an art form all their own. The Métis could speak various indigenous languages and were often literate in French or English. So where do they live in Canada? Well, here we have a map where it shows the percentage of population. So you can see the northern territories are most populated with Inuit, of course, and other Aboriginal groups. In Yukon 25, Northwest Territories 50, and Nunavut 85. Then we have different percentages in other provinces. So now let's talk about the different languages. Well, as you can see, we have Algonquian, the most of it. Then we have Eskimo and Athabascan. They are the 3 most important indigenous languages spoken in Canada. The indigenous people's dwellings. So we have the teepee, the longhouse, and the igloo. Of course, the igloo is for the Inuit indigenous group. The longhouse and the teepee are the Métis and the First Nations. So what do they eat? Well, marine life, of course, seal, fish, whale, crab, meat, caribou, turtle, snake, buffalo, duck, rabbit. So vegetables, we have corn, squash, pumpkin, apples, potato, sweet potato, beans. So the clothing. First Nations clothing was made from caribou skin or beaver fur. This is a war bonnet right there. Then we have moccasins. And for the Inuits, they would wear caribou skin, as you can see right there, and sealskin boots. Now, spirituality. The elders pass down meaningful stories to younger generations through oral storytelling. You're probably familiar with the dream catcher. Well, the dream catcher is a symbol of unity and is hung for protection. Now let's take a look at transportation. Well, you have snowshoes, canoes, kayaks, toboggan. Those are the means of transportation the indigenous peoples used. Now let's talk about the history of Canada a little. Well, first of all, Jacques Cartier. Who was Jacques Cartier? He was a French explorer who came to Canada in 1534. There were three main reasons for his exploration. First, to find an alternate route to China. Number two, to bring back gold, silk, and other riches from China. Number three, to claim the land for the King of France. His exploration of the St. Lawrence River allowed France to lay claim to lands that would become Canada. Now we're going to take a look at the three trips that he made to the New World. During his first trip, he explored parts of Newfoundland, the southern shore of the Labrador Peninsula, and north shore coastlines on the Gulf of St. Lawrence, just like in the map right there. Cartier's first two encounters with the Aboriginal peoples in Canada, most likely the Mi'kmaq, were brief. Some trading occurred. His third encounter took place on the shores of Gaspé Bay with a party of St. Lawrence Iroquoians, where on July the 24th he planted a cross to claim the land for France. So let's take a look at the meeting of two cultures. What do you think happened when the Europeans and First Nations met? Was it positive or negative? Give your reasons and pause the video. Well, now we have the positive outcomes. Well, of course, there are positive and negative outcomes. So let's take a look at the positive outcomes first. They learned of new foods, salt and bread. The Europeans introduced them to woolen cloth. They were also given traded iron weapons by the Europeans, which they became increasingly dependent on. So let's take a look at the negative outcomes then. The Europeans introduced them to alcohol, which had a tremendous effect on them. They brought diseases like smallpox, influenza, and measles, which killed thousands. The French tried to impose Christianity on them. So, indigenous people versus Europeans. The indigenous peoples, they had land and felt okay to share it. They wanted goods, money, and government assistance that Europeans could offer. The Europeans, they really wanted to settle the land in Canada. They realized that the indigenous people would always be a threat without signing an official treaty. So the indigenous rights. As the first peoples to live in Canada, indigenous people hold rights to Canadian land. But once the European settlers arrived in Canada, the indigenous peoples were pushed to the side. The government needed land in Canada to give to the European settlers, so they asked the indigenous people to give it up and sign a treaty. The government promised the indigenous people to get fair payment for the land. So, what can we do to help improve the quality of life and fulfill the rights of indigenous people? One way we can help is to learn more about their cultures, their way of life, and to understand their needs. In this manner, we can determine the best methods of helping them.